Hello there, my name is Lou White, and today we're going to discuss something called the Abomination of Desolation. What is that? Well, it started out being described by Gabriel in the book of Daniel, and we'll talk about that. Now, this object, the abomination, which is an image of desolation, that means destruction, is an image that you can actually see. And it is associated with fertility, which is in rebellion against Yahuwah. Now, the image of the destroyer of civilization is standing on the earth right now, and it's in a place where it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be there because the place that it's located is set apart. It's Kodesh in the Hebrew. The Hebrew concept of an image that's an abomination is the word shakutz. The word abomination in our translations comes from the word shakutz, and it is an image. In this case, it's a building because it was set up, it was built. And the messenger Gabriel was sent to Daniel about these events in the future. An apocalyptic message concerning an abomination of desolation was referred to. And as we search for this destroyer of civilization, it's not hard to find. Daniel 12, around verse 11, describes the setting up of this abomination, a common Hebrew term for an idol or a form. In this case, the form is it's an abominable thing. It's actually it's symbolic, but it's very realistic too. It's fertility. Now, the destroyer in the Hindu Trinity is Shiva, the destroyer. And desolation, of course, is associated with this image. So whose image is this object formed after? What does it represent? Well, Shiva shrines involve usually a large square building. Usually it's not perfectly square or cubical, but they're often designed as squares or some geometric shape. And then often on top of it, there's a dome rising up out of it. And the symbolism of that is called a Shiva Lingam. Of course, the word Shiva Lingam actually means Shiva stone, but it represents, a sexual object. So anyway, the destroyer, Shiva, has this wife called Parvati, who we also know as Shakti. And that's the star and the symbol that we see in Islam. And the star is his wife, and he is the crescent. The crescent is not originally Islamic at all. It's the symbol of Shiva. If you look at images of Shiva, you'll see associated with him a crescent around his head somewhere. And there's beads. The tears of Shiva, originally around 800 BCE, were designed as, necklaces and bracelets, and you'll see them associated with his images as well. And when this went into Islam, the prayer beads were already there, of course, because the Shiva shrine at Mecca was what Muhammad was so upset with. And but he kept all the objects and the behavior and the walking around and the beads. It didn't start with Muhammad. Those things were going on for centuries, long before his birth. Anyway, the star represents his wife, and the crescent represents Shiva, the destroyer. And the dome shapes that we see, these features on their, inside inside what they do as a practice, it's a Hindu ritual, pouring milk over these objects, and often the architecture of the building they're contained in is a giant Shiva lingam. And they practice circumambulation, which is walking around the object that they worship. And there's sometimes associated a yoga mat. Yoga is a Hindu practice. Yoga is a Hindu word for yoking, or praying to forces. And yoga often involves a mat. Now the mat represents a sacred space to the worshiper of Hinduism, and to Muslim, who inherited these things from the Hindus. And of course they received it by way of a trade route. We'll talk about that a little bit. These Hindu features are expressed at the Shiva shrine at Mecca, and they're imitated at other Muslim shrines. We often see domes associated with not only Islamic but also Christian worship places. As Christianity absorbed certain practices from Roman sun worship, Islam reflects a lot of Hindu things basically they're both from the Nimrod culture. Now the domed architecture is a feature we see inherited from the builders, and the masons are, basically reflecting a lot of these things too. They have domes on their shrines too. They go to shrines. These shrines were originally pagan shrines. They would have sex at these temples, these shrines, anyway, these designs are seen in the architecture of many religious and now governmental buildings all over the earth. I mean, your capitol buildings and state capitol buildings, nations, you see these things all over the place. In Russia, you see it. In Moscow, you see these domes. And they've inherited these things from Shiva worship. And if we combine all these elements together, the set-apart place, where's that? Well, it's the Temple Mount, obviously. It doesn't have to have a temple built there, but the place is the place where he placed his name forever. Now, if we combine these things, we have to assume that the abomination of desolation set up where it should not be is the Shiva shrine that's built on the Temple Mount. So anyway, Islam could be looked at too thoroughly as how it's designed, and it has a lot of these things, and people do these things they think that the deity Allah wants them to do, but in fact the word Allah is not a name. It's actually a Hebrew term for lofty one or mighty one. And several people have stated what their opinions are of this faith and what it's caused. It was designed actually to be a warlike religion, and we'll look into a little bit of that too. John Wesley, wasn't he the founder of the Methodists? Well, here's what he said about Islam. Ever since, quote, ever since the religion of Islam appeared in the world, the espousers of it have been as wolves and tigers to all other nations, rending and tearing all that fell into their merciless claws, and grinding them with their iron teeth. That numberless cities are razed from their foundations, and only their name remains. That many countries, which were once as the garden of God, and now a desolate wilderness, and that so many once numerous and powerful nations were vanished from the earth. Such was, and is at this day, the rage, the fury, the revenge of these destroyers of humankind. It isn't the people themselves, because our enemy is not flesh and blood, but it's principalities and powers of darkness. Now, Winston Churchill, he said this, quote, "How dreadful are the curses which Mohammedanism lays on its votaries, besides the fanatical frenzy, which is as dangerous in a man as hydrophobia in a dog. There is this fearful fatalistic apathy. The effects are apparent in many countries. Improvident habits, slovenly systems of agriculture, sluggish methods of commerce, and insecurity of property exist wherever the followers of the Prophet Muhammad rule or live. A degraded sensuality deprives this life of its grace and refinement, the next of its dignity and sanctity. The fact that in Mohammedan law every woman must belong to some man as his absolute property, either as a child, a wife, or a concubine, must delay his final extinction of slavery until the faith of Islam has ceased to be a great power among men. Individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of the religion paralyzes the social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world. Far from being moribund, Mohammedanism is a militant and proselytizing faith. It has already spread throughout Central Africa, raising fearless warriors at every step. And were it not that Christianity is sheltered in the strong arms of science, the science against which it had vainly struggled, the civilization of modern Europe might fall, as fell the civilization of ancient Rome. Now that's spoken by Sir Winston Churchill. I guess he was born around 1899. Now Daniel 11:31 relates to the Kodesh place. Now that's the Temple Mount, and an overpowering force that profanes the temple itself. And here's what it says in verse 31. Quote, "And strong ones shall arise from him, and profane the set-apart place, the citadel, and take away that which is continual, and set up an abomination that lays waste." Now, who controls the Temple Mount at this moment? Well, the Muslims control the Temple Mount. And what is set up there is a Shiva shrine that they probably don't know is a Shiva shrine. Up to now, the above scripture has been interpreted as fulfilled by a Greek ruler known as Antiochus Epiphanes, when he installed an image or an abomination of the statue of Zeus inside the temple. And after about 3.5 years, the Maccabee family overthrew their Greek oppressors, and this is celebrated every year by what is known as the civil holiday as Hanukkah. And if you look at Yehuchanan or John chapter 10, verse 22 and 23, you'll see Yahusha was not condemning Hanukkah. It was a national holiday, kind of. Now, there's been a lot of anti-Messiah imposters. Many have expected an impostor to claim to be the Mashiach over the centuries, and this has happened on repeated occasions. There have been several self-proclaimed false Mashiachs from the nation of Israel, and those proclaimed Mashiach by others, such as the Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitchers, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. He died in 1994, and several were waiting for him to basically rise from the dead or resurrect. That didn't happen. Several popes have claimed to be Christ on earth, which is a Mashiach on earth. And some have even claimed themselves to be Lord God. Now that's an actual claim that some of these people have made. Now, all of them claim to be the Holy Father. That's pretty abominable. But anyway, where is the Kodesh place? What Kodesh place was Daniel or Gabriel talking to Daniel talking of? And it had to be something that was built in a Kodesh place or set up. Now, Mark 13, verse 14 says that it's built where it should not be. Now, what would that be? Well, we'll put some images up at the end of this video, and maybe you can, look around and see what these things are and what they look like. Now, since the Crusades, which were actually wars, about 13 of them, at least, maybe more than that, they were fighting against the Muslims, to retake the city of Jerusalem, because the plan failed. See, they invented the faith of Islam to be a militant religion in order to overtake the land, because the scriptures were fiddled with. Now, as to the coming of our Master, in 2 Thessalonians we read, as to the coming of our Master Yahushua Mashiach, and our gathering together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to become easily unsettled in mind or troubled either by ruach or by word or by letter, as if from us, as if the Yom of Yahuwah has already come, the day of Yahuwah, because that's what we're all waiting for. He says, let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away has to come first, and the man of lawlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim, or that is worshipped, so that he sits as Yahuwah in the Mishkan of Yahuwah, showing himself that he is Yahuwah. Do you remember that I told you this while I was still with you? And now you know who restrains, for him to be revealed in his time. For the secret of lawlessness is already at work, only until he who now restrains comes out of the midst. And then the lawless one shall be revealed, whom the master shall consume with the ruach of his mouth, and bring to nothing with the manifestation of his coming. The appearing of the lawless one is by means of the working of Shaitan, with all power and signs and wonders of falsehood, and with all deceit of uprightness in those perishing, because they did not receive a love for the truth, in order for them to be delivered. And that for this reason, Yahuwah sends them a working of delusion, for them to believe the falsehood, in order that all should be judged who did not believe the truth, but have delighted in lawlessness. All right, now, while we're thinking about the lawlessness, that would be being without the Torah. When I was a Christian many years ago, it was told to me by numbers of people. I'd hear it on the radio, I'd hear it in person. Their Christian teachers were saying, these pastors, that Yahuwah gave us the 10 Commandments for a specific purpose. That purpose that they gave us, that they claimed that the commandments were for, was to prove to us that we could not obey his commandments. And this didn't set right with me. I thought, this can't be the reason that he gave us the 10 Commandments. But here's what the prophet Yashayahu, Isaiah, says in chapter 55, verses 10 and 11. For as the rain comes down, the snow from the heavens, and do not return there, but water the earth and make it bring forth and bud, and give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but it shall do what I please, and it shall certainly accomplish what I sent it for. The commandments were given for another purpose, and that is to cause good effects. They're the cause, they're the seeds, and the effects, we can't program effects. We have to program the cause first. The fruits of the Spirit come from the seed. You can't look at the fruit and say, well, you should be more like that. Well, you can't until you sow the seed. The seeds of the kingdom grow in a person and become their character, the character of Yahusha himself. Now, let's look at what Paul was talking about in that last text we just read from 2 Thessalonians. Paul mentioned a mishkan, which is a Hebrew word for dwelling place. Now, this could refer to an actual rebuilt temple, or it could refer to the dwelling place being the place or the environment where the temple building once stood. The Temple Mount, where the man of sin stands on the Temple Mount, might be the same effect. If he just stands on the Temple Mount, whoever this person is. It's the Kodesh place. Now, certainly, we're going to see an abomination if this happens. Now, the world order that's controlling the world, of course, we've covered this before, but for those that don't know, the world is organized in 3 echelons, or 3 orders. That the high order is the priestly caste, or the clergy. And then under them is the nobility. They're the ones that crown the kings. That's been going on since Nimrod. And then under them is a 3rd level called the laity, or the people, the common people. And then there's a 4th order that they call the media now. But anyway, the objective of the clergy, and since Nimrod, has always been to restore control over the entire earth. And Yahusha talked about that. He said, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world? It doesn't. the best thing that we can do and hope for is to become a servant of Yahuwah. But Nimrod was against that. He wanted no one to worship Yahuwah, but rather to look to themselves, which is actually what humanism is about. And the word for the world order in Latin would be ecumen. Ecumen. That's a word that refers to the rulership or control of the world. And it's a unification objective. The objective of ecumenism is to restore power and authority to the papacy that was lost due to the Reformation. You know, Martin Luther. The head wound that the papacy received was deadly. And the Jesuit order is established to accomplish this goal by any means necessary. And deposing kings and princes is in their wheelhouse. They will take you out if you stand in their way. The objective of ecumenism is also to unify all religions under one authority, focusing all control and belief. The world order today is focused in a world body called the United Nations. It's a foreign world power, and it's very dangerous. It is a Jesuit Illuminati organization, and it's seeking the creation of a global government. And it has within itself many initiatives, one of them being the United Religions Initiative, called URI. And it has been established to unite faiths under one controller. Now, backing up to this, like during the 600s, the 7th century, back in those days, in the northern Africa area and Arabia and the entire Mediterranean area, there was the Arabs were living everywhere there, and they were basically waiting for a Messiah because the Catholic organization had spread a rumor that there was a Messiah about to appear. And Catholicism, or the papacy, created this religion, this warlike religion. And both Catholicism and Islam share many Hindu traits. Both use holy objects and garments, and they use Shiva beads for prayer. An idol, it can be a form shaped as a man or an animal, or in this case, in Islam, it's a building to bow down to. Teachings are strictly controlled, and failure to comply with the teachings is severely punished. Now, there was a plan by the papacy to move its headquarters to Jerusalem, and that's the primary purpose for creating Islam. They trained Muhammad to lead the Arabs to understand that the Holy Land was theirs by birthright. All the Vatican had to do was alter the scriptural positions of the names Yishak and Ishmael in the scroll of Genesis. And Muhammad was convinced of what to do, to conquer the land given to them by Allah. And remember, Allah is just a Hebrew word for mighty one or lofty one. Now, this is also why the Arabs are fighting today, to take the land that was given to, actually, Yitzhak, Now, arrangements for a war against the occupiers of the land were made, and Islam was designed for war. A former Jesuit at the Vatican, whose name was Alberto Rivera, he was a Jesuit, he revealed who invented Islam. An authority over him, Cardinal Bia, explained to him how the Vatican invented Islam. An Arab nun, whose name was Khadijah, became the wife and advisor of this young man named Muhammad. He was cultivated to be a kind of Messiah to the Arabs. And all of North America was informed that they should expect the arrival of a great prophet very soon. So this band of violent raiders formed, and they were led by this new leader, and they attacked the Shiva shrine at Mecca in the year 622. And they removed hundreds of idols that were inside, and then they fled to Medina. This flight is called the Hijra. and this marked the first Muslim community in the year 622. And the fame of its leader and his new teachings spread like wildfire. Cardinal Bia shared this with Alberto, quote, "The Pope moved quickly and issued bulls granting the Arab generals permission to invade and conquer the nations of North Africa. The Vatican helped to finance the building of these massive Islamic armies in exchange for 3 favors. 1, eliminate the Yahudim and Christians, who they called infidels. 2, protect the Augustinian monks and Roman Catholics. And 3, conquer Jerusalem for His Holiness in the Vatican." Now, the funding and planning came from one source, the Vatican, and each careful step brought the papacy closer to this goal to conquer Jerusalem for His Holiness. Now, you can read more about the details of Who is Allah in a book that I recently put out called Who is Allah, and who the Arabs are really worshiping. They don't know who they're worshiping. Anyway, you can get this more complete information in this article. It's called The Abomination of Desolation, and it's located at our website. You can download it for free, and it's TorahZone.net. TorahZone is one word, TorahZone.net. Thanks for watching. We'll talk again.